this. Think about it. Of course we have to tell Paul. His daughter's been possibly compromised. Why was she following you? What does she know?
She wanted a little rebellion against her father. I am very hungry. And I ran out because I can't eat boss daughter. You understand? But this little fucker...
No.
He looks very tasty right now.
I did not recall asking for your recommendation, but this is mine. You must fall, Paul. S2-06 needs to be mothballed and canned officially.
It sounds to me like you're giving me an order, sir.
I cannot give you orders. But if there is anything I know, it's the game of press.
Where is Khan? I think it's time he...
He's at his daughter's funeral.
His funeral... Wait. Am I supposed to have signed the papers to release the body?
He said paperwork was clear and he was just going in to get it. This was, last night.
Last night? I was at the facility last night and Khan wasn't... present? Was he? This is Red Moon role-playing.
Monday. Day of the moon. Coming after the day of the sun, like cold frost following a brightly lit autumn day. Feared by wage slaves all over the globe, it is as inevitable as death and taxes. Monday. This is perhaps how the Monday briefing in the too brightly lit, windowless cellar feels to some of the S2-06 team. To others, Monday is a salvation from social commitments. A chance to bury one's pain and frustration with personal life in a mound of honest work. It's a safe bet that some of those gathered around the IKEA table cluttered with screens, printouts, laptops, coffee mugs, and the little paper cranes Shirley makes when he's nervous. That's probably how some of you feel. A reprieve. You just sat down a few minutes ago and already there are 3 roughly avian pieces of papercraft in front of the hungover soldier. Anna is silent. She doesn't even have a radiant smile for Paul the way she usually does. But none look worse for wear than Khan. Not even his immaculate suit can hide the fresh bruises in his face, the cuts on his neck, and broken fingers in plaster. As he powers up the projector and throws up his notes, his motions are deliberate and measured like he is in pain. He waits patiently for you all to settle down, all except Ellis. She is settled already. Her name not mentioned yet. There's palpable tension in the room. How do you look as you arrive, take your seats, and get in order for the Monday briefing?
I look tired. I've not slept well. I have rings round my eyes, as it were. I slept like maybe an hour. Most of my night was taken up with finishing clear-up detail on the botched operation, which I have made sure in my debrief to mention was largely due to the negligence of Miss Kitawara and her assets. I also had to finish up making sure that my mother is now somewhere safe, at least for now. I've made some phone calls to move a few of my things to the site, as I will be, for the moment, living here at work, because it's not safe to go home. Not really. Until at least the mole or the leak is sorted.
That part is impossible to miss, as 2 large suitcases stand in the corner of a room filled with Francis' clothing. There's no doubt what category he belongs to, seeming slightly more relaxed here at work than during other circumstances. Still tired. His eyes have the free makeup of a lack of sleep. Paul, you look at him. How are you faring after the weekend in Brighton?
While it hasn't been a very restful weekend for me, it has been more restful than the past few days of sitting up in vans and monitoring traffic, doing operations, avoiding bombs, and getting shot, climbing over fences. So Paul actually looks a little bit more rested than the earlier days, though there is tension. He seems to be entirely present, but you can see in his eyes that there are questions. Francis, I'm looking at you, but as I'm waiting for the official briefing to start, I don't say anything. I'm dressed casually and in a relaxed shirt and trousers. Looks as if it's just another day at work.
If we allow ourselves a moment to look elsewhere, probably only Karin and Kitwara have a direct eyes on her right now. Because of course, the cell, the room where Ellis is, has surveillance in it. If you would glance at the screen, looking into Ellis' room, what would we see Ellis do this early hour of the morning?
Am I still awake?
Have you tried to stay awake?
Maybe. I think it would look the same anyway, because I think she is... I don't know how the cell is, if it's any furniture or anything, but I think she is... I am crawled up with my arms around my knees. And she might be sleeping, she might not. I think it's hard to tell. But she's very, very still. And she hasn't said a word.
Yeah, there's just a bed in the room and a small table, the door to the closet, and there in the corner the huddled, compact, dark shape of a human being in pain.
Yeah.
If human being is still the appropriate word. Isaac's voice is strained, his words more economic than usual, without their trademark intensity. When he starts the Monday briefing. Welcome back to Operation Firebrand team. At least 2 blanks, both SI or higher, or Ash because of your efforts, and we have a significant amount of leads to follow up. We expect several identifications to be the result of the next stages of this investigation. For instance, it's highly likely that the target of the bomb may have been a blank body himself or herself. And other leads could reveal more of the infected, including our engagements with the enemy. We believe that the upcoming identifications may include whomever infected Ellis. We have taken losses, yes, but far fewer than expected based on our previous engagements with the enemy. And Ursula looks like she might be able to pull through after all. But don't count her on returning to the team anytime soon. We will also have to address the issue of recruitment in this meeting as well, as we are all aware. We've had the close calls or even exposure to possible leaks, so the choice what groups we are to recruit from is perhaps not as easy as it seems. We have a lot to cover and I want to hear your opinion. In fact, you know much more than me of the operation at this point, so I will bow to whatever Paul and you recommend for the next stage. Let's get on with it, and before you ask, we will address team issues, the event of the weekend, as well as what has not yet been written and what has been written about our actions in the press in separate meetings. As I have already told Anna, all these issues are secondary, and there are, to my knowledge, no grounds to change the composition or responsibilities of this team currently, only to add new recruits. Anna scoffs out, "Sure, sir," as she takes over the PowerPoint showing a rough 4-point agenda on the screen. It says, Paul on new approaches to termination policy of blanks. Francis on research lab findings in brief. Anna on analysis of data from Blue Vision search, questioning and seizure of records. Paul on next steps and decision regarding updated termination policy. Does that look like a reasonable agenda to you? Anna coughs out.
I spin my coffee mug around and I do a little grunt as in approval.
I just adjust my glasses, look to you and say, well, do you want to go first or shall I?
I'll start with a bit. I stand up. You haven't seen me willingly stand up during the briefings until now, but there seemed to be some sort of determination coming forward. And I sort of stand behind my chair, holding on to it as a bit of support. Right. New approaches to termination policy of blanks. As we all know by now, we have had some success in the elimination process of the blank body threat. However, this has come with casualties from our side, and even though it might be a sort of even battle, our suspicions up until now have been that the blank body threat is a terrorist threat with a clear danger to the public. We have spent several years of research leading up until the knowledge of a bomb going off in Croydon, which, when we found it, turned out to be a limited assassination of one person who may or may not themselves be a blank body. While we shouldn't question that the operation has been a success so far, despite the casualties, I think we at this point must ask ourselves, where do we go with this? If this threat is not a widespread terrorist threat threatening the public, could we perhaps consider going over to a more investigative way of action? Instead of going in for killing these hostiles immediately, maybe there is a way to find out more about the entire operation, who they actually are targeting, and trying to keep a low profile in this, as things have been a bit more exposed than we would have wanted to as a recent. I'll leave the word open.
Sam Shirley shakes his head a bit slowly. Don't you think that the risk on undue influence on government policies, of judicial process and so on, makes the blank body threat a public menace. I mean, how many of the terrorist attacks of the last decade or more involve the infected as a root cause, or at least a part of their operations? Can we ignore the fact that leaving even one of them alive for even one day could lead to new tragedies or culpability in planning new tragedies?
I sort of wiggle my glasses a little and say, you would be correct. However, it is precisely for what you just said, which requires a different approach. This issue, I believe, for far too long has been treated, as Paul says, as some sort of terrorist ploy, when actually the true issue is itself the condition, the disease. This has become a health concern, not just for our country, but worldwide. Considering the numbers I have run, take into account that this condition primarily causes individuals to take blood from others. How long has this been going on for? You say hundreds of years, but I assure you, if you take into account modern populations and modern ease of delivery, how many people die from medical anemia every year? How many people die from blood-transferred diseases? There are many things in play that we currently don't have the data for, and I believe we are going to need it. Otherwise, who knows the situation, how much more it could spread. Maybe it already is been spreading after all. When did we discover this issue? Only in modern times, perhaps? Perhaps indicating that it is on the increase, or not, I'm not sure. What I will say is, data is required, and currently the policy of killing them, or as we have subjects being, even when we try to take them in, expiring, has left us with nothing. Very little data. Meanwhile, the time I've managed to have just one stage 1 and stage 0 experimentation, I believe I have found triple the amount your folks have found in years. Imagine what would happen if multiple scientists were doing the same thing, not just me by myself.
Concise a little bit. Yes, your addition to the team is no doubt most valuable, and I feel humbled for you expressing the concerns of public health. So, Francis, tell me, is anemia really a health problem? I've never really encountered anyone dying from it or hearing that it is a widespread problem. What's the state of anemia as a threat? And is it possible that the blank bodies add significantly to this health problem?
Indeed. Well, anemia alone accounts for 800 deaths a year in the UK alone. I'm not sure if you knew that. More importantly, anemia causes severe disabilities and pain for millions. The current estimates of YLD, that's years lived with disability from anemia, are around 70 million. And where other diseases show a steady decline, there is no decrease or even an increase in severe anemia, especially among males globally. Now, that has been attributed to many things over the years, but taking into account what we know now, how much of that possibly is due to the increase in the possible blank body population feeding as they do? We aren't even quite sure on that. I've made estimations, and I take out some papers.
And feeding sometimes with immediately lethal results, Anna pipes in, as we saw yesterday.
Exactly. She is correct. Now, while observation on our front so far has been limited, I have reason to believe, for example, that... and I kind of do stutter a little at this point. Sergeant Ellis's proclivities seem very clumsy and amateurish. I believe if that was the case for all of them, the amount of incidents of people being attacked by animals, for example, would have been far higher. I believe that if they've been at it this long, there have to be better methods of the feeding process or the extraction of blood, either through some technique or through machinery, blood vans, taking blood out through syringes, that sort of thing. That, unfortunately, again, is currently a blank. However, I'm sure that while the best probably try and regulate it, it can only be so regulated. How many diseases are being spread because of this? And again, is this going to spread more? Is this going to increase? That is the issue we have in front of us, like any disease.
Are you saying that, from what little I've heard from yesterday, is that there has been another incident of Ellis attacking someone, and this time...
Yes, you will be given the briefing in full, and we go and debrief her ourselves. But unfortunately, yes, the situation with her staying with you on the little weekend thing went as I thought it would. And I narrow my eyes at both Khan and Kitawara.
I raise my head and I say, well, I take responsibility for that. I took it under my wing to look after Sergeant Ellis during this weekend. I did not heed the advice of Anna, who did warn me beforehand that we were all too soft.
Thank you. Finally.
On the sergeant. And I understand that I have been mistaken. And I do owe you that apology, and I am sorry. It hurts me to say this, but if I may ask a practical question here. How long... It has only been, 2 days now? Since the last time she drank from another person. Right?
Well, at this current state, it would be merely since last evening.
Yes, well, since before that. I'm talking about Michael.
Yeah, and at this rate of feeding...
That's what I mean. She has not eaten any other food or sustenance as far as we know. This actually works as her sort of main sustenance. She will not eat anything else. And do we suspect that this is what the main population of the blank body count, how they sustain themselves?
Conclusive. She has partaken of coffee and some solid food has gone down, and she at present hadn't reported anything unusual about that. She also was given some small samples in earlier testing, but I admit it wasn't to her palate and it wasn't enough. I've already organized this morning a brave volunteer. I look at some of the security. They have donated a bit of a blood sample in a reasonable, safe, substantial number. She will be administered this sample shortly for her briefing.
And what happens if we cut out her feeding completely in this regard and just feed her normal food?
I don't know yet, Paul. That's an interesting line of inquiry, but I haven't started it yet.
If we keep her restrained and do not allow her... I know, I understand this might sound absurd, but if we do not allow her to partake in any of this, go cold turkey, if you will, if indeed it is some sort of addiction, and just feed her normal food, what will happen?
I do not know, but I don't believe in Ellis's case that's necessary. After all, I've already had that treatment being applied to our other guest.
Yes. The elderly gentleman you picked up at the Selhurst train depot.
Yes. He has not been given anything.
Yes, I ask you to remember also the special status of Alice as an asset to our operations. She is, as it goes, loyal to our cause, but still a member of the infected. That, of course, gives her a special position and a special utility for us. I ask you not to underestimate the use of that as you plan on her activities.
I understand, Khan. Like I said, while I agree with the restriction from this point forward of our civilian freedoms, I still believe she's an asset, and I believe with better treatment, she will be more stable.
Good. We will take it upon ourselves that we have failed in our duties to our colleague and not watched her closely enough.
Right.
That's unfortunate.
That said, it was a needed test. That is the only reason I agreed with the operation at the time. I give Kitawara a bit of a look. And unfortunately, in Ellis's defense, circumstances were against her. Our own assets were woefully inadequate.
Back to the issue at hand then. If we have dealt with the idea of Ellis, this was a sort of a side line here, as I'm still wondering if that is what infected individuals consume, if it actually is blood. If that is, because to me that changes the threat, the picture here towards the general populace.
Indeed, it is as I was saying, Paul. The issue here is a medical one. Whether or not they truly need it, perhaps irrelevant right now. Our research seems to indicate that they are driven to it, and as you've seen Ellis already, to lethal results. Not to mention that Ellis, and indeed all we've seen so far, is still stage 1. Stage 2, I have not been able to truly observe, as we've had a habit of killing them.
In the history of this unit prior to you joining us, we have encountered several older individuals with the blank body strain. They have, to a man and to a woman, been blood feeders, as far as we can tell. Every single one of them. If there are any deviations to this, it has not yet come to our attention, but you are very right. This removes a blinder from our eyes. We have seen this, as you say, as organized terror activity, and I will make claims that we should still. But I was not wrong to add you to the roster, Francis. The public health aspect and the macro scale of this that you can see, but we have been blind to, is vital to continued operations. And it does argue for the hiring of more medical personnel, perhaps even for contacting the CDC. I have had reports from certain individuals among our American friends that indicate that there could be groups that have observed similar anomalies within the CDC, especially at the main office in Atlanta.
Of course, and I imagine part of the lack of intelligence has of course been that we don't always cooperate fully with our friends across seas.
For good reasons, of course. But to connect again to the terrorist activities of the blank body threat, we know for a fact that these things are somehow interested in our policies and conflicts as a nation. We know that the bomb in Blue Vision targeted the blank body, yes, but from all I have seen, and you are welcome to look at the bomb, the remains of it, the unexploded bomb, in room 4, just next doors, where it is currently being kept. If it would have gone off, it is likely that it would have caused a fire and thus possibly massive collateral damage in a poor neighborhood with bad fire preparedness. And you may remember that the WMD expert that spoke out against the official reports that Iraq had WMDs killed himself just before the official hearing. And you might also remember the cause of death. That is right, acute blood loss. I am on the inside track of this, and I know for sure that the pathologist that examined the corpse found anomalies that was not reported to the public.
Exsanguination.
That is just one example of a possibility of it seeming to be an interest among the blank body menace in our engagement in the Middle East, or at least in our response to conflicts in the Middle East.
So they would normally mobilize them and keep a tight number, or to keep themselves highly organized in order to not create situations such as that one which we had yesterday. They must be sort of be raising each other, as in a sort of organization of keeping tight rules, perhaps even on how they sort of commit to these. I don't know, what do you call them? Feeding rituals?
These creatures, these individuals are organized, yes, from everything we can tell, yes, but also highly secretive. In some of the material that I have reviewed from Operation Firebrand, a tower has been mentioned. This has appeared in previous investigations also, and we may now, as an operating thesis, consider this to be the name for one, at least, of their organizations. The Tower, or the Ivory Tower.
That's just another sign. I sort of flick through the folder. Another sign of this being ruled from up high. From what we know of the Duchesky agency, she seems to be a co-owner of an upscale legal firm in Kensington. High level of legal advice. Not unheard of course, that terrorists would have such high-powered lawyers involved in their operations. But it would indicate that the people we are dealing with here, of course, are involved at a very large scale.
Again, that isn't too new information. It's also why in our dealings with the CDC and other medical organizations, we still will need to have the utmost top secrecy. We cannot dig too far too obviously. After all, my would-be blackmailer was very keen that all the research I was doing be destroyed, so we can assume they know we are researching the condition and probably take great priority in its destruction. So we need to be very, very careful that all information is on a need-to-know basis and kept highest clearance.
Good, which reminds us of the no plain text report policy. So please remember to use code even in internal memos and emails. That is absolutely correct. Which takes us to the next point, Francis. Could you summarize for the team your findings in brief? I know you have investigated the corporal remains of that we have on ice, the dogs, and so forth.
Yes, and a side note on that, Mr. Carr, we will need to have a discussion later about your unauthorized removal of one of our specimens.
I look up with a surprised look on my face. What's this now?
It's thanks to Kitawara that I even discovered that Mr. Khan removed one of our cadavers. I understand why, but you still should have run it by the books, Mr. Khan.
Isaac?
I had hoped to avoid confronting this matter in this meeting, as it is highly personal, but no matter. She is still alive.
What?
I'm sorry, what?
When you consign someone to the flames, it's a farewell that is permanent. Unlike you Christians, he says and looks directly at Paul, we do not officiate necessarily with a cleric. It is the family that is in the focus of the funerary rites. And it is not appropriate for a body to remain uncremated for longer than a week. That is peril to the soul.
Not appropriate. We're talking about evidence material. People...
I attempted a burial ceremony. It was cut short by the one I tried to bury by my daughter.
Wait. You're going to need to slow down. I knew you'd attempted this funeral, right? What do you mean still alive? Where is she?
Staked in the cellar.
In our sight?
Yes.
And you were going to tell me when? This is radical... I actually generally look flabbergasted for a moment because I'm generally thinking, like, this... alive! Okay, you know what? This in itself is a massive tangent, and I will try and keep to the point, but we are definitely, after I've spoken with you and we've debriefed Ellis, I'm going down there immediately.
Yes, I would hope so. And I would hope that you see some merit in the battle I fought.
That is where your scars come from. Jesus Christ.
I was locked in there for 6 hours with her.
Alright, we're going to put a pin in that. My report otherwise, which I'd start, like, ruffling through the papers, but you can tell, Paul, I'm really, like, mind blown by this sudden reveal. Okay, so... Well, I have deduced that the infection is indeed spread by blood. Perhaps that is the key to why the blood is required. Unknown. As I said, by my estimations, I have diagnosed temporarily classifications of Type 0, Type 1, Type 2, although, admittedly, between Type 1 and Type 2 there are still many questions. But Type 1 currently being what I believed we had access to in Ellis, possibly now your daughter, although this revelation could potentially move her up to Stage 2. But again, I digress. The hound that we were attacked with also portrayed symptoms of having the infection within its system. However, the hounds and animals from the other event were completely uninfected.
What? But they're how they behaved. That's...
They could have been well-trained dogs, still.
Not to mention, from my experience with the leak, there seems to be some indication that they have some skill with, as Paul says, animal trading.
My thoughts drift a bit at this moment back to Rupert and how he seemed to take control over Gabrielle's mind. Yes, that we can't rule out that possibility that they were just trained attack dogs, though we did never see the hand behind them on that occasion.
Yes. Meanwhile, as I said, the infection has been traced into both Ellis, your daughter, the dog, linking all so far, making me believe I have at least found the strain, although the strain itself is extremely hard to identify. Compared to, let's say, normal blood, often it looks the same, and even dead blood. It is almost a combination of both, in a very, very, very slight method that even I probably can't replicate all the time, I'm afraid, at this stage. But it is enough for me to at least believe I have found some trace of the infection. At least.
Do you believe that you can, based on a blood test, identify whether a subject has the infection?
Possibly. However, at this stage, I don't think I'd be able to confirm whether they had merely been a Stage 0, that is, to have ingested the infection, and whether they were actually truly infected. So far from the notes I've deduced, death... I pause for a moment. At least a temporary death seems to be involved in the progression from stages. In the case of your daughter, for example, Mr. Khan, it's quite possible she could now be stage 2, but I'm going to have to investigate.
Even the remotest indication of an identification process is a massive step forward. Thank you, Francis. Let's leave this subject and go to slightly more conventional investigation methods. Anna, you have compiled the findings from the planned bomb site, Blue Vision, etc. What have we found? Yes, the owners have been reluctant to cooperate, but we have acquired their records. The bomb was, as you know, set up in a private viewing room booked by what appears to be a local male prostitute for a meeting with a client, but none of them showed up.
Do we have a name on this prostitute?
Yes, we do. We do have one from the records, which I managed to crack open just after minutes. William Gilbert, and we do have a likely address. The question then is who was targeted, the client or the prostitute, or is this even a working boy? We have no idea. William Gilbert, that's the name you have. As I said, the parlor owners were reluctant to share booking information at all. And we had to bring a seizure warrant for the records to be removed. And we did not have to apply any legal pressure, but the witness statements from the owners confirm that it is likely that these rooms were used for anonymous sexual encounters in exchange for money. In itself, on the side of the prostitute, this is not a bad offense. Of course, the John is in for a world of trouble. And we can, if identified, bring him in on those charges, no problem. The firebomb itself was a large amount of thermite hidden inside a brand new box of extreme restraints and was ordered to be placed in the room by the renting client. The restraints seem to have been delivered the day before by a truck driven by a ginger man, matching the description
Seamus.
of Seamus, yes. That being an impossibility, it is still either a coincidence or another argument for extreme longevity, since his last famous act, which he was never persecuted for but heavily questioned for, was his involvement in the London bombing in 1977. And the truck itself has been identified as one of the trucks found outside the Selhurst train depot. So involvement of the group that we busted wide open seems to be confirmed. The firebomb also had traces of black dog's hair in its components. The security camera directly outside the booth has been tampered with and was off for the whole day, and the owners are deeply remorseful for their lack of vigilance in this. The camera in the street picked up the following things of interest: delivery of the supplies, 5 boxes from that same truck that we found at the Selhurst depot. It also picks up a what looks like a man in his 20s, matching what is on record for William Gilbert, waiting outside of Blue Vision until 20 minutes past 8, then heading
So we
off.
have a footage of him.
We do. And we haven't examined the footage closely enough to confirm whether there are any other activities involved here, since the name William Gilbert and his appearance wasn't known to us until yesterday. We have had very little time to go through and look at other aspects of that tape.
So we
There is another man, a portly man in his 50s that shows up several times in the footage, and he leaves at roughly the same time as Gilbert's.
No identification?
None. It's not really possible. And we haven't looked that closely at this. There are several figures that could. We need to study the tape further too.
If he is a returning customer, there is always the alternative to bring in someone from the pawn shop to have a look at them and see if they can identify him.
While this is all going on, by the way, you notice me making shorthand notation. The shorthand notation, I've already clarified, is going to be for when we debrief Ellis. I do believe she should know this and want it to be quickly relayed to her.
There is, primarily among them the last known address of the suspected booker of this stall.
And this is the client, the prostitute that you mentioned, William Gilbert.
Yes.
He booked the stall. Did he also order the constraints and then showed up outside the store?
The restraints were ordered. As I said, there were 5 big boxes delivered, so it seems to be like a standard order. But yes, he did specifically specify that the client wanted one of those boxes, and that was added to the bill of the rental.
And we suspect that the client just didn't show up for the meeting?
We have no idea. Was he pre-warned? Was it due to our activities? We really don't know. And again, it is not known whether William was the target or whether the person he was meeting was the target. We know that William has hired stalls before. In fact, 6 times during the last 2 months. No identities given to any other people that he has met during those rentals, however. And it seems impossible to get that information from the owners because they say that they simply don't pay attention to that.
I would like cross-referencing with records of the other earlier bombed pawn shops that we know, if there could be a possibility of William Gilbert's having rented stalls there previously in correlation with this bombing that happened here.
I'll look into that immediately. That is a very, very good point. Also, it might be of your interest to know that the address is in Herne Hill for Williams. He lives on Ruskin Walk 26, his last known address.
Ruskin Walk in Herne Hill. Good. Very good. So, we never fully closed the subject, but I would, of course, want to take everyone's opinion in regarding to the issue of kill-on-site policies.
Yes, that is the final part of our agenda, and I do think that we already have our answer. Paul, you have heard everyone involved. What's your verdict? Do we revoke the kill-on-site policy in favor of a decision-making process? And in that case, how will that decision-making process look?
I do believe that I still want the word from you, Isaac. What are your thoughts on this? I know they have been fluctuating as of late.
What we have recently seen, the problem is more complex than we imagined, especially as we have seen indications of antagonism between blank bodies of a kind that we did not expect. We thought them to be more of a united front than they apparently are. And in that in itself, there is plenty of reason to secure more intelligence before acting the next time. So with the reservation based on Francis's word that every single one of these things we remove is a benefit to public health, with that caveat, I agree to a more considering, a slower process. When needed, I believe we need to be able to take decisions very fast, however.
Yes.
Maybe even in the field.
Agreed. I look up and I look around the room and I take in the different gazes that I meet. And I say, I would like for us to make our next move as turning this into more of an investigative action. I know that not everyone will favor this, but I believe that since we now, to our favor, have a live subject, and I look over at Isaac Khan, from a faction, if that indeed is what we can call them, if they are going against each other. I seem to recall some famous last words from this particular subject of that we are fighting on the same side, whatever that means. Information could be gained from having live specimens.
Well, admittedly, the information we've just received from Mr. Khan about his daughter certainly changes everything. However, I feel I need some clarification. You said your daughter is alive?
Staked, I believe, was the word you used.
Or whatever you may call it. She is in the form of suspended animation that these individuals have. However, she sees locomotion like everyone else on a violent insertion of wood into her chest.
Is that... That might need to be updated in my...
If it is a possibility to resuscitate her or not, I don't know. But there's been no sign of decomposition or turning into ash. Like 2 of our subjects have rapidly decomposed. None of those factors.
I see. I only question Mr. Khan because in my notation it was said the concept of this staking was fatal. That is why I am querying it.
Was that what you were attempting?
It was not an intentional action per se. It was an act of desperation. It was me or her. But I did not observe the same kind of rapid tissue collapse that we have seen in other victories.
Interesting. Very well, then that will have to be considered.
I think one of the urgent plans of action is to question this subject, then, if we can resuscitate her. You said introducing fire somehow woke her up?
Yes.
Huh. And can we constrain such a subject, do you think? You said you were able to win over her in physical force?
I wouldn't say that. I spent 6 hours in that maze. Most of it in complete darkness. She screamed. She sounded like an animal more than a person for most of the time. But I think I managed to reach her.
Well, now that you've come forth, we will later administer that in a scientific manner. Might even be worthwhile having Ellis present, actually.
Agreed.
Could be useful.
But that brings us back to the subject of the kill policy. So if we would entertain the idea of terminating a specimen, who would need to make that call?
I would at this moment not judge anyone here in the room if push comes to shove and they feel that their life or someone else's in this unit is on the line to make that call themselves. However, we will of course go through standard procedures of briefing before any possible situation of encounter.
So we adopt a kill policy more similar to the one we use in mortal terrorist cases then?
Yes.
That of course is a far longer process than we sometimes will have need for. Do you think it's sufficient if you and Francis is in agreement? Or if you and another team member are in agreement? Is that sufficient?
I believe so, yes.
Good. then that is decided. I will not make any kill orders myself until I have been properly briefed in the details of this operation, which, as I said before, you know much more of than me at this point.
Very good. With that said, I do welcome any further opinions on this, and this is just a current stance. Things may still change, as they have done rapidly over these last few days.
Indeed. If that's all, I shall be attending to the debrief with Ellis. Paul, I imagine you'll want to attend to that as well. And then possibly after that, Mr. Khan, we'll be seeing about your daughter.
You have listened to an episode of Red Moon Roleplaying, where we play the chronicle No Man is an Island for Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition. Our storyteller was Martin Ericsson, and we were also joined by Anna-Karin Linder. The music was created by Lola Zaza, and the sound effects are from the fine folks at freesound.org and Sirenscape. We would like to give massive thanks to our champions of the Red Moon, Martin Heuschober, Nastasia Raulerson, Simon Cooper, David, and Julia for their generous support. And we would of course also like to thank all of our other patrons. Without your support, the show would not be possible. If you want to support our work, please check us out on Patreon. You can get access to bonus campaigns for Cult Divinity Lost and Coriolis there, as well as get early and raw access to all of our recordings. You can also hear your name read on the show as a champion of the Red Moon, as well as play Cult with us. Most importantly, that support is what keeps the show going, so do check us out there. And remember, death is not the end.